Lena Hart had always believed that music was the one language that never lied. From the time she was a little girl sitting at a second-hand piano in a small apartment, she knew her fingers could speak what her mouth could not. Every note she played carried her heart out into the world, and the world loved her for it. By the age of 28, she was one of the most admired pianists in Europe. People said she didn't just play music, she became it. Her schedule was packed with concerts, interviews, and rehearsals. The nights were long, the travel endless, but she didn't mind. She was doing what she loved, and for that she was grateful. Her manager used to tell her, "Lena, the world listens when you touch those keys." She smiled every time she heard that. She never imagined that one day those same hands would scrub floors instead of playing on stage. It happened on a rainy evening in Vienna. The grand concert hall was full, the audience waiting in silence as Lena took her place. She looked radiant in her white gown, the stage lights shining off the polished piano. She bowed, sat down, and began to play her signature piece, a composition she had written herself after the loss of her father. Every sound from the piano seemed to weep and heal at once. Halfway through, something went wrong. A sharp pain shot up her right arm and her fingers froze. The sound faltered. The crowd gasped softly as she tried to continue, but the notes came out broken, scattered like falling glass. The pain grew unbearable, her vision blurred, and the last thing she heard before the darkness was the echo of her own unfinished melody. When Lena opened her eyes again, the air smelled different. The ceiling above her wasn't the white marble of a hospital. It was old wood, cracked and uneven. Her head throbbed and her hands felt rough and smaller somehow. She sat up suddenly, heart racing, trying to understand where she was. The room was tiny, cold and bare, with a single window half covered by torn curtains. A faded uniform hung on a hook beside a bucket and mop. She stumbled to a small mirror nailed to the wall. What she saw made her freeze. The reflection staring back wasn't her own. Gone were her sharp features, her golden hair, her pianist's hands. Instead, she saw a pale, thin girl with tired eyes, messy black hair, and calloused fingers. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest. What is this?" she whispered. The voice wasn't hers either. Before she could think, the door banged open. A stout woman with a sharp face and narrow eyes entered, holding a broom like a weapon. "Mira, you lazy girl. Are you still in bed?" "The family will be up any minute, Mira," Lena repeated weakly, trying to make sense of the name. The woman glared. "Don't just stand there. Get to the kitchen before Mrs. Reinhardt sees you. And wipe that stupid look off your face." She left as quickly as she came, muttering under her breath. Lena sat there, stunned. Reinhardt? That name sounded faintly familiar. Slowly, she looked down at her hands again, those rough, unfamiliar hands, and touched her face. This couldn't be real. She must still be dreaming, or perhaps she had lost her mind. But the chill of the stone floor under her bare feet told her otherwise. Hours passed like fog. She followed the woman's instructions, moving through the large mansion as if in a daze. The hallways were lined with portraits, chandeliers, and thick carpets that swallowed her steps. Other maids glanced at her with annoyance. Some snickered when she fumbled with the silver trays or forgot where to place the cutlery. They called her Mira the Mute and the Clumsy One. She wanted to defend herself, to tell them who she really was, but every time she opened her mouth, the words stuck. Who would believe her anyway? By the afternoon, Lena understood enough to realize the truth. Somehow, she had woken up in another woman's life. Mira was a servant here, one of the lowest in the Reinhardt household, a grand estate belonging to a powerful business family. No one treated Mira kindly. The head housekeeper barked orders, the other maids sneered, and the young master of the house, Adrian Reinhardt, was known for his coldness and perfectionism. That evening, after endless chores and aching hands, Lena slipped into the servants' quarters and sat by the small window. Outside, the sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in orange and pink. For a moment, she almost forgot where she was. Her fingers tapped softly on the window ledge, forming a rhythm out of habit. She could almost hear the notes in her mind. Then she heard laughter behind her. Two maids were whispering near the doorway. "Look at her," one said with a smirk. "Mira thinks she's a lady again, daydreaming like she's someone important." "Maybe she's composing music in her head," the other teased. "What's next? She'll ask to play the piano in the main hall?" They laughed loudly and walked away. Lena's cheeks burned. She lowered her head, swallowing the hurt. The words echoed in her mind. She thinks she's a lady. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the concert hall, the crowd, the unfinished melody. She thought of her mother, who must be searching for her, and her fans who would be waiting for news. But how could she reach anyone? There was no phone, no way to prove who she was. All she could do was survive in this strange new life. The next morning, she was assigned to clean the grand hall. It was a magnificent room with tall windows and marble floors. In the center stood a black grand piano covered by a sheet. The sight of it took her breath away. She hesitated, looking around. No one was there. Slowly, she lifted the cover, revealing the smooth keys beneath. Her fingers trembled as she touched them. It had been so long, or maybe only days, but it felt like a lifetime. Carefully, she pressed one key. The sound was soft, clear, like a whisper from her old world. Then another, and another. Soon her hands moved almost on their own, remembering every movement. The melody that came out was gentle but full of sadness. It was the same song she had been playing when she collapsed. The same notes that had carried her into this strange fate. As she played, tears filled her eyes. It was the only thing that still felt like hers. She didn't notice the man standing by the doorway until the last note faded. He was tall, with calm eyes and a presence that seemed to command the entire room. He wore a gray suit and a watch that gleamed in the light. Lena froze, her hands hovering over the keys. He stepped closer. "Who allowed you to touch this piano?" His tone was sharp but not angry, more curious. I'm sorry," she stammered, quickly standing up. "I just wanted to clean the dust." He looked at the instrument, then at her. "You were playing," he said quietly. "That wasn't dusting," she swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." He didn't reply right away. His gaze lingered on the piano as if he were hearing something still playing in his mind. Finally, he said, "What's your name?" "Mira," she whispered. He nodded slowly, then turned to leave. "Be careful, Mira. Not everyone here forgives mistakes." When he was gone, Lena's heart pounded. She recognized him now. Adrian Reinhardt, the CEO of Reinhardt Industries, known for his brilliance and his distance. People in the mansion spoke of him with fear and admiration. He had built his company's fortune after his father's death and was said to have no time for music, art, or emotion. Yet she had seen something flicker in his eyes when he heard her play. The rest of the day passed in silence. The other maids noticed something had changed in her expression, but they didn't know what. That night, Lena lay awake again, thinking about the man, the piano, and the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. She didn't understand how or why this had happened, but one thing became clear. If she wanted to survive, she couldn't just be Mira the maid. She had to hold on to the one thing that made her who she was, her music. Over the next few days, Lena learned more about Mira's world. The other servants avoided her, assuming she was strange. The head housekeeper kept her busy with the hardest chores. But sometimes, when no one was watching, she found ways to play. On tabletops, against the wall, even tapping rhythms while washing dishes. The movement soothed her, reminding her of her old self. One evening, while carrying laundry past the study, she overheard a faint sound, a violin recording playing from a speaker inside. She paused, drawn to it. Adrian was there, standing by the window, listening quietly. For a brief second, Lena saw a side of him that others didn't. Lonely, thoughtful, almost fragile. He looked up, noticing her shadow by the door. "Do you need something?" he asked. She quickly shook her head. "No, sir. I'm sorry." He studied her for a moment before saying, "That piece you played the other day." "What was it?" "It was something I learned long ago," she said softly. He nodded and turned back to the window. "It sounded like it came from the heart. Keep that, whatever it is." Lena walked away with her pulse racing. His words replayed in her head all night. Keep that, whatever it is. Maybe fate had taken everything from her, but it hadn't taken her gift. That night she sat by the window again, the moonlight casting soft shadows on her face. She whispered to herself, "If I can't wake up from this, then I'll live through it. I'll find my way back somehow." Outside, the world was quiet, but inside her, the music began again, faint, trembling, but alive. She didn't know it yet, but this was the start of her second life. The maid who once couldn't lift her eyes would one day lift an entire audience to its feet. But for now, she was just a girl in borrowed skin, holding on to a dream that refused to die. Days turned into weeks. and Lena slowly began to settle into her strange new life as Mira. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a giant cage made of silence and rules. Every morning started before sunrise. She had to help prepare breakfast, sweep the long corridors, and polish silverware until her fingers went numb. The other servants worked quickly, laughing among themselves, while she often fell behind. Every mistake earned her a scolding or extra chores. Yet no matter how tired she felt, she kept her head down and tried to learn. In the quiet moments when no one was watching, Lena still found herself drawn to the piano in the grand hall. She would lift the cover carefully, run her hands over the smooth keys, and play just enough to remember how it felt. Those brief moments were her secret world, a small reminder that she was still Lena inside. Sometimes she would think about the real Mira, the person whose life she was now living. What had happened to her? Where had she gone? Did she have family, dreams, or memories? Lena wondered if somewhere out there, Mira might be trapped in her old body, confused just as she was now. But no answers came, only more questions. One afternoon, while cleaning near the main hall, she overheard two maids gossiping. "Did you hear?" one whispered. "The young master is holding a charity gala next week. All the business partners and guests will be here." The other maid giggled. "Of course I heard. He does it every year. I just hope we're allowed to watch from the back this time. The music, the dresses, it's like a fairy tale." Lena froze. A gala meant music, maybe even a pianist. Her heart began to race. It had been so long since she played before an audience. The thought alone filled her with both excitement and sadness. That night, she sneaked into the grand hall again. The moonlight spilled across the piano, making it look almost magical. She sat down quietly and started to play a simple melody. Something soft, something from her heart. As her fingers moved, all the frustration, loneliness, and pain she had bottled up seemed to pour into the music. She didn't realize someone was watching her from the doorway again. Adrian stood there silent, his hands tucked into his pockets. He had been passing by when he heard the piano and stopped. There was something about the way Mira played, so full of emotion yet without showing her face, that caught his attention. When the last note faded, he stepped closer. "You again," he said quietly. Lena jumped up, startled. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean—" He raised a hand to stop her. "You play very well," her heart pounded. "Thank you, sir." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Where did you learn?" She hesitated. "Just from listening and watching others." "I never had lessons," he frowned slightly. "That's hard to believe. Your playing has discipline." She lowered her eyes. "I practiced whenever I could." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Adrian said, "We have a professional pianist scheduled for the gala. But if they don't arrive in time—" He paused, almost as if thinking out loud. "You might play a short piece." Her eyes widened. "Me, but I'm just a servant." He gave a small shrug. "Talent doesn't always care about titles." And with that, he walked away. Lena stood frozen, unsure if she had imagined the entire thing. But the next morning, the head housekeeper called her aside. "You've caught the master's attention, haven't you?" she said in a cold tone. "Don't think playing a few keys will make you special." "Stay in your place, Mira." Lena said nothing. She didn't want trouble. But deep inside, a spark had been lit. For the first time since she woke up in this body, she had something to look forward to. As the week passed, she practiced secretly at night. Every note reminded her of who she once was, but now she played not for fame or applause. She played to feel alive again. Sometimes she would think of Adrian's expression when he listened. He didn't show it often, but she could sense something unspoken in his silence, an understanding, maybe even admiration. On the day of the gala, the mansion was transformed. Bright chandeliers glittered above, flowers filled the air with perfume, and guests in elegant clothing filled the grand hall. The servants moved like shadows, making sure everything ran perfectly. Lena stayed behind the scenes, watching through the doorway as people laughed and chatted. Then chaos struck. The pianist who was supposed to perform had sent a message. He was stuck in another city and wouldn't make it. The head housekeeper panicked. "What are we going to do?" she whispered to another maid. "The young master will be furious." Adrian arrived just then, his expression calm but firm. "There's no need to panic," he said. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Lena. "Mira, you'll play." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to stare at her. "Sir?" the housekeeper stammered. "She's just— I know who she is," he said. "She can play. I've heard her." Lena's heart thudded so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. She tried to speak but couldn't. Adrian gave a small nod. "You have nothing to lose. Go." She walked slowly to the piano, her hands trembling. The whispers behind her felt like thunder. Is he serious? A maid? This will be embarrassing. She sat down, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. The crowd blurred before her eyes. For a moment she was back on stage in Vienna, with lights above and silence around. She began to play. The melody that filled the hall was soft at first, then grew stronger. It was her own composition, one she had written long ago when she believed dreams were within reach. Each note carried her pain and her hope. The room grew quiet. The guests stopped talking. Even the servants at the edge of the hall stood still. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then slowly the audience began to clap. The applause grew louder, filling the room. Lena sat frozen for a second, overwhelmed. Adrian watched her with a faint smile, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. Later, after the guests left and the hall grew quiet again, she helped clear the tables. The other maids avoided her, their eyes full of something between envy and disbelief. The housekeeper said nothing. As Lena was about to leave for the night, Adrian approached her. "You did well," he said simply. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He tilted his head slightly. "The way you played, it was like you were telling a story." "Maybe I was," she said softly. He nodded once, as if he understood, and turned away. That night, when she lay in her small bed, Lena stared at the ceiling with tears in her eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt proud again. It wasn't the applause that mattered. It was that she had shared her soul even in this strange, borrowed life. The next morning, things began to change, even if only a little. Some of the servants stopped mocking her. Others still whispered, but now it was with curiosity instead of scorn. The cook even handed her an extra piece of bread with a small smile. "You played beautifully, Mira," she said. The housekeeper remained cold, but she no longer yelled as often. And Adrian, he became a quiet presence in her days. Sometimes she caught him watching her from across the hall as if studying her. One evening he called her to the study. "I've been thinking," he began. "You have a gift. It shouldn't be wasted polishing floors." She looked down nervously. "I'm just doing my job." "You're doing more than that," he said. "Tell me, if you could, would you play again? On a real stage?" The question made her throat tighten. I don't know if I could." "Why not?" She hesitated. "Because I don't belong there anymore." Adrian leaned against the desk, his gaze steady. "Talent belongs anywhere it's found. Sometimes life just hides it in the wrong place." His words stayed with her long after she left the room. As the days went on, he began letting her practice in the hall during the afternoons, under the excuse that the piano needed tuning. Sometimes he would listen quietly from the back of the room, saying nothing. Other times he gave her gentle advice about confidence or posture, even though he wasn't a musician himself. Little by little, something began to shift between them. It wasn't romance, not yet, but a quiet connection built on respect. He saw her not as a servant, but as a person with fire in her soul. And for Lena, his belief in her became a new kind of strength. One evening, after a long session of playing, he said, "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who believed music could change people." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it still can." Adrian looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe you're right." When she went back to her small room that night, Lena sat by the window again, watching the stars. For the first time since waking in this strange life, she didn't feel lost. She felt found. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. Her story wasn't over yet. The girl who had once fallen from the stage was learning to rise again, one note at a time. The days after the gala changed everything for Lena. Though the mansion still moved with the same strict routine, something invisible had shifted. She was no longer just another maid who faded into the background. People noticed her now. Some servants whispered about her talent, others said she was only lucky. But Lena didn't care. For the first time since she woke up in this strange life, she felt seen. She went about her chores quietly, Yet there was a lightness in her steps that hadn't been there before. Adrian had also changed. He didn't smile often, but his manner toward her softened. He spoke less like a master giving orders and more like a person trying to understand another. Sometimes when the afternoon sun filled the grand hall, he would ask her to play something. She always hesitated, but his steady gaze told her she didn't have to be afraid. So she would sit down and her fingers would find their way across the keys. Each piece she played carried memories, some painful, some warm. And though she said little, Adrian seemed to hear everything she didn't say. One afternoon, after she finished playing, he said quietly, "You play like someone who's lived many lives." She gave a small smile. "Maybe I have." He didn't press further. There was something in her eyes, a quiet sadness that he couldn't quite name. Life in the mansion wasn't easier, but it began to feel more bearable. The other maids stopped mocking her openly, though their stares still carried envy. A few even came to her for help with chores, and Lena always agreed, grateful to finally be treated with some kindness. But peace in a place like this never lasted long. One morning, news spread that the mansion would soon host a special event, a private dinner for business partners from the company Adrian managed. The servants were told everything had to be perfect. No mistakes, no noise, no room for failure. The pressure in the house grew thick. The head housekeeper barked orders from dawn till night. Everyone rushed about nervously, trying to meet impossible standards. During one of those busy mornings, Lena was assigned to clean the library. It was a quiet place filled with tall shelves and the smell of old paper. As she dusted the piano near the window, she caught her reflection in the glossy surface. For a second, she saw her old self again, the famous pianist who once played under bright lights. The thought made her chest ache. Then she heard footsteps. She turned and saw Adrian entering the room with a folder in his hand. "Good morning," he said simply. She bowed slightly. "Good morning, sir." He placed the folder on the desk. "I've been thinking about what you said before, that you learned to play on your own." "Yes," she said carefully. "Would you show me how you practice?" She blinked, surprised. "Show you?" He nodded. "I've always admired music but never learned. Maybe it's not too late." She hesitated, unsure if he was serious. But his tone wasn't mocking, it was almost sincere, almost human. So she agreed. That afternoon, after everyone had gone about their duties, she returned to the library where Adrian was waiting. She showed him how to rest his fingers on the keys, how to feel the rhythm before pressing down. His first attempt sounded uneven and hesitant. She couldn't help but smile. "You're too stiff," she said gently. "Music isn't about control. You have to let go a little." He gave her a small, almost boyish grin. "Let go? That's not something I'm used to." "Then maybe you should start," she replied softly. He laughed quietly, and for the first time she saw him not as the powerful CEO or strict master, but as a man trying to remember how to feel. Over the next few days, he asked her to teach him again. Each session was short, just a few minutes stolen between meetings, but those moments grew to mean more than either of them expected. For Lena, teaching him reminded her of the joy music once gave her. For Adrian, it was a small escape from the cold world of business and expectations. Still, not everyone in the mansion liked what they saw. One evening, as Lena left the library, she overheard two maids whispering nearby. "She's getting close to him," one said. "Did you see them together?" "Laughing?" "She thinks she's special now," the other replied bitterly. "Just wait. The master will get bored and she'll be back to scrubbing floors." Lena pretended not to hear, but their words cut deep. She didn't want anyone to think she was using Adrian's kindness for gain. She wasn't even sure what was happening between them. It wasn't friendship exactly, and it wasn't something romantic either. It was more like two lonely souls meeting in a place neither of them belonged. That night, as she lay in bed, she made a promise to herself. She wouldn't let anyone's jealousy or gossip stop her from being true to who she was. If music was the only thing that still belonged to her, she would hold on to it fiercely. A week later, Adrian called her to his office. His expression was serious. "Mira," he began, "there's something I need to ask." She nodded, waiting. "I've been invited to a company event, a formal dinner with music performances. Our regular pianist can't make it. Would you consider playing?" Her heart skipped. "You want me to play again?" He gave a small nod. "Yes, you have a gift and I don't want it hidden away. But sir, I'm just..." Don't say you're just a servant, he interrupted gently. You've already proven you're more than that. Lena stared at him speechless. She wanted to say no, to avoid attention, to avoid trouble, but deep inside something urged her to say yes. Maybe this was fate giving her another chance. I'll do it, she said finally. Adrian smiled faintly. Good, the event is in 3 days. Practice as much as you need. The next few days passed in a blur. Lena practiced every night after finishing her chores, her hands trembling with both excitement and fear. The mansion staff watched her with mixed emotions, some admiring, others disapproving. On the evening of the event, the venue shimmered with lights and chatter. The guests were important business figures, dressed elegantly, their laughter echoing through the hall. Lena waited behind the curtain, her heart pounding. She remembered how it used to feel, the anticipation before a performance, the quiet before the first note. But this time she wasn't playing as Lena Hart, the famous pianist. She was Mira, the maid who had been mocked and overlooked, and somehow that made it even more meaningful. When her name was called, she stepped out slowly. The murmurs began immediately. Some recognized her as a servant from the Reinhardt mansion. Others looked surprised, even amused. Ignoring the stares, she sat down at the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then she began to play. The melody started soft, like a whisper, then grew into something powerful and full of emotion. Every note carried the weight of her journey. The fall, the confusion, the small sparks of hope. She wasn't just playing music. She was telling her story without words. By the time the last note faded, the hall was silent. Then came the applause, slow at first, then growing louder until it filled the room. Adrian stood at the edge of the stage, clapping quietly but proudly. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that glance, she saw something unspoken. Respect, admiration, and maybe something deeper. After the performance, several guests came to compliment Adrian about his talented pianist. One of them asked, "Where did you find such a gem?" Adrian's answer was simple. Sometimes talent hides in unexpected places. Lena stood quietly nearby, her cheeks warm, her heart full. Later that night, when the guests had left and the hall was empty, she sat alone at the piano again. Adrian entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her. "You played beautifully," he said. She smiled softly. "Thank you, it felt like I was myself again." "You should feel that way every day," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you who you are." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint sound of rain outside. Then he said, "You know, when I first heard you play, I thought it was just a coincidence. But now I think it was something else." "Oh, what do you mean?" she asked. He looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe you came here for a reason. Maybe to remind me and yourself that some things are worth fighting for." She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, her throat tight with emotion. When she returned to her small room that night, she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, she didn't feel trapped in someone else's life. She felt like she was building a new one, note by note. But she also knew life had a way of testing people just when they started to rise. Somewhere deep inside, she sensed that her story with Adrian and the strange twist of fate was far from over. And as she drifted to sleep, the faint sound of her own melody echoed in her dreams, carrying both a promise and a warning. The higher the music climbs, the louder the silence that follows. The days after the event felt unreal to Lena. It was as if she had walked out of one life and stepped into another. People in the mansion who used to ignore her now looked at her differently. Some offered polite smiles, others whispered behind her back, but she didn't care anymore. For the first time, she was doing something that mattered. Adrian had kept his word. He allowed her to play in the evenings when her chores were done, saying it helped him relax after long hours of work. Sometimes he sat quietly in the corner of the room, reading documents while she played softly in the background. Other times he just listened, his expression calm but his eyes distant, as though the music reminded him of something he had lost long ago. Their quiet companionship became part of her routine. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them was never uncomfortable. It was peaceful, almost comforting. One evening, as the last light faded outside, Adrian said, "I've been invited to a regional art event. They're looking for performers. You should join." Lena froze, surprised. "Me? But you're not a professional?" He interrupted gently. Maybe not anymore. But you have something most professionals don't. Honesty in your music. She looked down at her hands, still rough from cleaning, but her heart fluttered at the thought. I wouldn't know how to enter something like that. I'll take care of it, he said simply. You just focus on playing. And just like that, a new door opened. The next few weeks were filled with practice. Every spare minute she was at the piano, going over pieces she remembered from her past life and composing new ones that spoke of her journey. Sometimes, when she grew tired, she'd glance toward the door, half expecting Adrian to walk in with quiet encouragement. He often did. He never gave long speeches, just small reminders. Don't rush. Feel it. Or, your music is already enough. Simple words, but they stayed with her. The night before the event, she couldn't sleep. She lay on her small bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. What if she failed? What if everyone laughed at her again? But then she remembered how she had survived worse, how she had woken up one day in another woman's life, stripped of everything she once was and still found the strength to play again. She whispered to herself, no matter what happens, I'll play with my heart. The next day came faster than she expected. The competition was held in a grand concert hall in the city. It wasn't as large as the ones she used to play in, but it still made her palms sweat. Adrian accompanied her, though he stayed quietly at the back, giving her space. When her turn came, Lena stepped on stage. Her shoes clicked softly against the wooden floor. The lights felt warm against her skin. She took a deep breath and sat down at the piano. As her fingers touched the keys, everything else faded. The sound filled the hall, gentle at first, then powerful and alive. The melody spoke of falling, of getting lost, of finding light again. Every note carried her story, though no one in the audience could have guessed just how real it was. When the final note lingered in the air, there was a pause, and then the applause came. Steady, sincere, and full. Lena bowed her head, her heart racing. For a moment, she thought she might cry. In that instant, she didn't feel like Mira the maid or Lena the pianist. She was simply herself, a woman who had fallen and risen again. Later that evening, as the judges announced the results, she could barely breathe. When her name was called as the winner, the room erupted in applause again. She covered her mouth in disbelief. She had won. Adrian was the first to reach her backstage. He didn't say much, just placed a hand on her shoulder and said, I knew you could. She smiled through tears. I couldn't have done it without you. You did it because you never gave up, he replied softly. That night, as they drove back to the mansion, neither of them spoke for a long time. The city lights blurred past the car windows. Finally, Adrian said, You know, there's something about you, Mira. You remind people what it means to feel alive. She looked out the window, her voice quiet. I just play what I feel. That's exactly why it works, he said. The following days were a whirlwind. Word spread about the mysterious maid who played like a master. A few small magazines even mentioned her name. Reporters called her the hidden pianist. The staff at the mansion didn't know how to react. Some were proud, others jealous, but none could ignore her anymore. The head housekeeper treated her with forced politeness, clearly uncomfortable that a servant had become a local celebrity. Lena, however, stayed humble. She still did her chores, still greeted everyone with the same quiet kindness. Fame had come to her once before and vanished overnight. This time she wanted something deeper, peace, purpose, and honesty, but not everyone saw her success as harmless. One morning, a man from a nearby business group came to meet Adrian. He was known for his arrogance and greed, and he had seen Lena's performance. During lunch, he commented loudly, I heard one of your maids is a pianist. Quite unusual, isn't it? Adrian nodded calmly. She's talented, the man chuckled. Talented or not, people are talking. You might want to be careful. Having a servant play at public events, it might look improper. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his tone cooled. I don't base my decisions on gossip. The man laughed awkwardly and changed the subject, but the remark lingered. Later that day, Lena found Adrian in the study, staring out the window. Is something wrong? She asked quietly. He looked at her for a moment, then shook his head. No, just business talk. Don't worry about it. But she could tell something bothered him. That night, while she played softly in the hall, Adrian sat listening, lost in thought. When she finished, he said quietly, People will always have opinions, but I don't care what they say about me. I only care that you keep playing, she smiled gently. Then I'll keep playing. Their bond grew stronger after that, though they still kept it simple and respectful. It wasn't about power or admiration anymore, it was about trust. She reminded him of the world beyond numbers and contracts. He reminded her that kindness could exist even in cold places. But every story that rises has its storm. A week later, an unexpected letter arrived at the mansion. It was from the National Music Association, inviting Lena, under the name Mira Lane, to perform at a major concert in the capital. It was the kind of opportunity musicians dreamed about. When she showed the letter to Adrian, his eyes widened. "This is big," he said. "You should go." She hesitated. "But what about my duties here?" "The housekeeper will never allow it." He smiled faintly. "Let me handle her. You just prepare." It took a few days of convincing, but eventually the arrangements were made. Adrian even offered to sponsor her travel and rehearsal expenses. Before she left, he said quietly, "This is your moment, Mira, no matter what happens. Play like it's your last time on stage." She nodded, her heart full of both gratitude and fear. The journey to the capital felt surreal. The city was larger and louder than she remembered. Reporters waited outside the concert hall, eager to see the mysterious pianist who had risen from nowhere. Backstage, Lena sat quietly, trying to calm her nerves. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who had lost everything, and the woman she had become. She didn't know how this second life had found her, but she finally understood why. Maybe fate had broken her only to rebuild her stronger. When her time came, she walked onto the stage with steady steps. The lights were bright, the audience vast. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece she chose was one she had written in secret. Something new, something born out of both pain and hope. It began softly like a whisper from the past, then grew into a melody that soared and wept at the same time. Every note carried her truth. By the time she finished, the hall was silent. Then came the applause, stronger and louder than anything she had heard before. Some people even stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. As she bowed, she saw Adrian standing at the edge of the stage. He wasn't clapping loudly, just smiling, a proud, quiet smile that said everything words could not. That night, as she stood outside the concert hall, the cool wind brushing her face, she realized something important. Her journey wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about finding herself again, piece by piece, through music. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't the same broken soul who had once woken up in someone else's life. She had found her melody again, and this time, she would never let it fade. When the applause ended that night, Lena stood frozen on the stage, her chest rising and falling as if she had been holding her breath for hours. The lights above her glowed softly now, like stars coming to rest. She could still feel the warmth of the audience's eyes on her, their admiration quiet but deep. For a long time, she just stood there, unsure if this was real or another dream. When she finally walked off the stage, Adrian was waiting by the curtain. He didn't say anything at first. He simply reached out, gently straightened a loose strand of hair from her face, and said with a small smile, "You did it." Lena felt tears sting her eyes. "I almost didn't believe I could." "You didn't need belief," he said softly. "You only needed truth. You played from your soul." That night, the two of them sat outside the concert hall under the city lights. The world around them was loud, cars passing, people laughing, but between them there was a calm silence. Adrian handed her a small bottle of water, and they both laughed when her hands shook too much to open it. "I think I left all my energy on that stage," she said jokingly. He smiled. "Good, that's where it belongs." For the first time in a long while, Lena felt peace. Not the kind that came from applause or success, but the kind that came from knowing she had given everything she had and held nothing back. When they returned to the mansion the next day, things were different. The household buzzed with talk of her performance. Even the housekeeper, who once looked down on her, offered a quiet nod of respect. It wasn't much, but Lena could see in her eyes that it meant something. Adrian had arranged for her story to reach more people, not for fame, but to inspire others. "People need to know that it's never too late to rise again," he told her. "That even from the lowest place, you can still find your light." Lena didn't like the attention, but she understood his reason. The world had once taken everything from her, and now she wanted to give something back. Over the following months, she continued to perform. Her name, Mira Lane, started to appear in newspapers and online articles. Many people came to her concerts not because she was famous, but because they felt something real in her music. She had become a voice for those who had lost hope. But as her popularity grew, so did the questions. Reporters began to dig into her past. Some wondered how a maid had learned to play like a world-class pianist. Others speculated that she had been trained secretly by someone powerful. Lena tried to stay calm, but the pressure worried her. One afternoon, she found Adrian in his office sitting behind a pile of papers. "They're starting to ask about my past," she said quietly. "I don't know how long I can keep the truth hidden." Adrian looked up at her. "You don't owe anyone your past, Mira. You owe them your present." She smiled faintly. "But what if they find out who I was?" "Then they'll see what you've become," he replied simply. That night, she thought long and hard. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. The name she once carried, Lena Hart, belonged to her too. It was part of her journey, her pain, her fall. Mira Lane was not a different person. She was the same woman, reborn through hardship. At her next concert, she made a quiet decision. After her final piece, as the crowd clapped, she took the microphone and said, "I want to tell you something I've never said before. The woman you know as Mira Lane once had another name. I used to be someone else, someone who lost everything. But life gave me a second chance, and I learned that you can always begin again, no matter how far you've fallen." The hall fell completely silent. Cameras flashed. People leaned forward, waiting. "My name," she continued softly, "was Lena Hart." A wave of whispers spread through the audience. Some gasped in recognition. Lena Hart, the pianist who vanished years ago after a tragic accident. Others simply stared, unsure how to react. But then someone began to clap. Then another. And soon, the whole hall rose in applause, not for the old Lena, but for the woman who had survived and grown stronger. After the show, Adrian met her backstage. "You told them," he said quietly. "I had to," she said. "I don't want to hide anymore." He nodded, pride in his eyes. "Now they know the full story, and it's even more beautiful." In the weeks that followed, interviews poured in. Lena didn't tell every detail of her strange, unexplainable experience of waking up in another body. Some things were too mysterious to share. Instead, she spoke about loss, perseverance, and the power of music to heal. Her words touched hearts around the world. With Adrian's help, she used the attention for something good. They founded a small organization called Second Sound, a music program for children who couldn't afford instruments or lessons. She wanted to give others the chance she almost lost, the chance to find their voice through music. The first class began in a small hall not far from the mansion. Lena sat among the children, showing them how to press the keys gently, how to listen before they played. Watching their eyes light up reminded her of her own beginning, long before fame and loss. Adrian often visited during those sessions. He would stand at the doorway, arms crossed, just watching quietly. One day after the children left, he walked up to her and said, "You know, I've built companies, led hundreds of people, but I've never seen anyone change lives the way you do." She laughed softly. "I'm just teaching music," he shook his head. "No, you're teaching hope." They stood there for a moment in silence. There was a warmth between them, something unspoken but deeply real. It wasn't about status or gratitude anymore. It was about two people who had found each other when they were both lost in different ways. As months turned into a year, the foundation grew. Lena's concerts raised funds for music programs across the country. Her story became a symbol of resilience and kindness. People didn't just see her as a pianist. They saw her as proof that life could begin again after loss. One evening, after a long day of teaching, Lena sat at the grand piano in the hall alone. The sunset poured golden light through the windows. She began to play softly, an old melody she had written in her youth, now colored by all she had lived through. Adrian entered quietly and listened from behind her. When the song ended, he said, "That one sounds different." She smiled without turning. "It's called Return. It's about finding your way home." He walked closer. "And have you found it?" She looked up at him and nodded. "Yes, I think I finally have." In that quiet moment, with the soft echo of music still hanging in the air, it felt like everything had come full circle. The maid who once scrubbed floors had become a voice for hope. The pianist who had once fallen had risen again, not through fame or fortune but through the power of her heart. Lena no longer lived for applause or recognition. She lived to create, to inspire, and to love the life she had been given again.
And Adrian, who had once been a man buried in work and silence, found himself smiling more often.
Listening to music again and believing that kindness could change lives. Years later, when people spoke of her story, they didn't just remember the concerts or the awards. They remembered the woman who had started from nothing, who faced ridicule and pain but never lost her song. They remembered how she lifted others even when she was still healing herself. Her name, Mira Lane or Lena Hart, didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the melody she left behind, one that spoke of courage, forgiveness, and the beauty of second chances. And in the mansion where it all began, the piano still stood in the grand hall. Sometimes when the evening was quiet, its notes could be heard drifting through the windows, soft and full of life. Just like her heart,